I'm going to share a new discovery that I made, which apparently no scholar has ever noticed, even though it was hiding right out in the open. This is something which shows that Charles Dickens inadvertently admitted that he had obtained A Christmas Carol from some other source. So there's going to necessarily be a little background in this, and bear with me, I have to set the stage. So I'm going to have to go by my notes. This is kind of complex. So the history of this is that Charles Dickens supposedly wrote A Christmas Carol in around 6 weeks, from mid-October to early December 1843, and he published it on December 19, 1843. The first mention of Charles Dickens writing A Christmas Carol is in a letter to a friend of his named Mathew Napier, dated October 24, 1843, and he calls it a little scheme, quote unquote. He says, "Accordingly, I plunged headlong into a little scheme I had held in abeyance during the interval which had elapsed between my first letter and your answer, set an artist at work upon it, and put it wholly out of my own power to touch the Edinburgh project until after Christmas is turned." After Dickens published A Christmas Carol, he sent a copy to a friend of his in America named Cornelius Felton by letter of January 2nd, 1844. And I'm going to read the relevant portion as it is published in the Pilgrim edition. This is volume 4 of Charles Dickens' letters. This is like the most official edition. And he says, "Now, if instantly on the receipt of this, you will send a free and independent citizen down to the Cunard Wharf at Boston, you will find that Captain Hewart of the Britannia steamship, my ship," he says, "has a small parcel for Professor Felton of Cambridge, and in that parcel you will find A Christmas Carol in prose, being a ghost story of Christmas by Charles Dickens, over which Christmas Carol Charles Dickens wept and laughed and wept again, and excited himself in a most extraordinary manner in the composition, and thinking whereof he walked about the black streets of London 15 and 20 miles, many a night, when all the sober folks had gone to bed. He don't like America, I am told, but he has some friends there, as dear to him as any in England, so you may read it safely. Its success is most prodigious, and by every post all manner of strangers write all manner of letters to him about their homes and hearths, and how this same carol is read aloud there, and kept on a very little shelf by itself. Indeed, it is the greatest success, as I am told, that this ruffian and rascal has ever achieved." Now, that's the way it's published in the Pilgrim edition. Now we're going to turn to his biographer and publicist, John Forster. His biography appeared in 1872, The Life of Dickens, and this is how he refers to it and paraphrases it. He says, "I can testify to the accuracy of his own account of what befell him in its composition, with what a strange mastery it seized him for itself, how he wept over it, and laughed, and wept again, and excited himself to an extraordinary degree, and how he walked, thinking of it 15 and 20 miles about the black streets of London, many and many a night after all sober folks had gone to bed." Now you notice that John Forster says that he can testify to the accuracy of this statement, but he doesn't say how, and it's a little suspicious that he feels the necessity to say that at all. The truth is that it was entirely bullshit, the whole thing was all theatrical nonsense that Dickens made up off the top of his head. He did no such thing, okay? So how could John Forster testify to the accuracy of that account, and why would he mention that he had to, okay? The part about not liking America was redacted by James T. Fields, the American publisher, when he included it in his Our Whispering Gallery series in the Atlantic Monthly magazine in 1871. You can see here that he's just used ellipses. I'll put it on the screen. Furthermore, in the original, the word America is lowercase, and even the prestigious Pilgrim edition put it in uppercase. They didn't mention that Dickens actually had spelled America clearly in lowercase, and I'll show you that as well. So this is a minor cover-up, but they didn't know what was actually in this letter, okay? Note in the closing signature to this letter, Dickens calls himself the proscribed one, and then under that says, "Oh, breathe not his name." So he didn't usually do this. It's very rare, actually. I looked at the previous 2 years in Volume 3 of the Pilgrim edition, and in 1842-43, I only found 5 examples other than his pseudonym, his early pseudonym, Boz. I only found 5 examples of Dickens signing with anything other than his own name. And one of the examples was pretty interesting. He assigned himself and his wife Catherine Bully and Meek. And that letter is dated July 31, 1842. But we know now from the things that have come out about Dickens that he really was a bully towards his wife Catherine. Very much so. Okay, so that was the truth. So his modus operandi is that he says what's actually happening, but he jokes about it as though it's just silly, see? But it's not. He's not exaggerating anything. He's actually euphemizing. So keep in mind that when he says things like bully and meek, he's euphemizing. It's actually much worse than what he's pretending it is. And when he calls himself a rascal and a ruffian, that's also euphemizing, and it's also much worse than what he pretends it is. And when he says he's the proscribed one, "Oh, breathe not his name," that's literal, okay? Because he knows he stole A Christmas Carol from an American couple. So now we're going to get into my new evidence. So that's the background. I hope you hung in there with me, but I had to provide a little bit of context for this. So now we're going to go to the discovery I made. And remember, nobody has ever seen this. And this letter is famous. Everybody knows about this letter. John Forster, quoted it. It's the basis on which everybody believes that Charles Dickens wrote A Christmas Carol, other than the story of the goblins who stole a sextant. And I've debunked that as well, but that's another topic. So here I'm going to show you in its original handwriting. And this comes courtesy of the New York Public Library, who says it's in public domain. I'm going to show you the original passage. And you will see that there's something scribbled out, where the Pilgrim edition has him saying, "Indeed, it is the greatest success, as I am told, that this ruffian and rascal has ever achieved." He wrote something else first. Well, what was it? If you look at this very carefully, you can find that it had to have been the 2 words "fastened on." And that means that what he actually wrote was, "Indeed, it is the greatest success, as I am told, that this ruffian and rascal has ever fastened on." And remember that he had previously referred to this as a little scheme. So he has accidentally admitted that he fastened on it from somewhere else, that it wasn't his. And then that could be open to interpretation, I'll admit that. But then he felt nervous. See, he says, uh-oh, I've called myself a ruffian and a rascal, and then I've said I fastened on A Christmas Carol. That's too revealing. So he had to scribble that out with his heavy corkscrew scribble and put "achieved," which I think it's important to point out that "achieved" is a colorless, bland word. And he's kind of a dramatic writer, okay? He likes to write in dramatic prose. So whatever he first wrote was kind of tongue-in-cheek and dramatic, and then he put this bland word "achieved" in. That means he's covering for himself. Now, I have a master's in counseling, and there's no question in my mind that the only reason he would take something interesting like "fastened on" and then think better of it and scratch it out and put a bland word like "achieved" is if he's covering. He's not improving the language, okay? This is not an improvement on the prose. So the question is, am I right? Did he actually write "fastened on"? Because if he did, I think it's a done deal. If he wrote "fastened on" under those circumstances and scratched it out and put "achieved," that means he was nervous. He was feeling, like this is not a good idea to put these two things together, ruffian, rascal, and "fastened on." So yes, there can't be anything else. There's only 2 things in the English language this could possibly be. One of them is "fantasied on," and the other one is "fastened on." And that's something I determined by going through and scientifically quote unquote, scientifically looking at, okay, you have to have an F, a lowercase f at the beginning. And then you have two lowercase letters, and the fourth letter has to be a T. And then none of these lowercase letters can have descending strokes in them, see, except the F. In the beginning, none of the other characters have a descending stroke, and it has to be so many characters, like 8 or 7 or 8 or 9 in that range. And certain of the characters you can make out. So D has a descending at the end. And there are no words in the English language in this context, in past tense, that don't have a D on the end. Okay, so that eliminates every word in the English language that doesn't have a D on the end. It has to have an F. It has to have a T in the fourth place. None of the other characters can have descending strokes. So when you eliminate all of these variables and narrow it down to that point, then I used a specialized search engine, and that's it. Fastened on is the only thing this can be. So therefore, Charles Dickens definitely wrote fastened on in this context, thought better of it, and scribbled it out, not realizing that somebody like myself would come along with a process of elimination, logically inferring that it couldn't have been anything else except fastened on. So there's your smoking gun. I think it's pretty much ironclad. I don't see any other explanations. The only explanation is, and nobody I've written to has denied that it's fastened on. They've only said, oh, he could have fastened on the idea or, whatever. Well, no. Again, they don't have a master's in counseling, these English professors. I do. And I understand context. You have to understand the cognitive map, what they call the cognitive map, associations. Where do associations come from? One thing comes from another, comes from another. You also have to understand the sociopathic personality, which Dickens had, in my opinion, and I've substantiated that in my paper, which you can find linked below this video. So he was feeling nervous. He had to get rid of that phrase, fastened on, and he didn't care whether it sounded fun or interesting or not. He wasn't improving this prose. He just said, achieved will work. Nobody will ever know. And nobody ever did know until I came along.